Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's Explainer. So today, we're literally stripping away all that confusing legal jargon to look under the hood of business law. We're going to examine the core engine that makes absolutely any contract run. In the legal world, they call it consideration. Now, if you've ever felt totally intimidated by legal texts, hey, don't worry. We're going to walk through this step by step. By the end of this explainer, you'll know exactly what turns a simple, everyday promise into a legally binding agreement. Okay, I want to start by posing a bit of a mystery. Think about this. Can a contract actually be legally valid if you don't get anything in return? Like, if I just promise to give you my car and you give me absolutely nothing back, is that a contract that would hold up in a court of law? It's a fascinating question, right? And the answer lies right at the heart of what separates just a casual promise from a strict legal obligation. Let's solve this mystery by looking at what the law actually requires for a valid exchange.
To find our answer, we have to turn to Section 2D of the Indian Contract Act 1872. But look, let's skip past the formal section numbers for a second and just focus on the plain English definition. Consideration is, quite simply, the exchange of something between two parties with acceptance. Think of it as the ultimate mutual give and take. The law basically says that for an agreement to be a real, legally binding contract, both sides have got to have some skin in the game. When two parties decide to give something in return during the process of a contract, well, that something in return is your consideration.
All right, let's dive into this with an everyday example we can all easily relate to. Imagine Party A is offering a mobile phone to Party B. In exchange, Party B is handing over a certain amount of cash, which equals the monetary worth of that phone. That money given in the exchange, that is the consideration for Party A. And the mobile phone itself, that's the consideration for Party B. A contract absolutely cannot be valid without this mutual exchange. It's literally the fuel that makes the engine of the contract actually work. And just to ground our theory, authentic study notes defining this exact concept make it clear this isn't just abstract philosophy, it's the literal bedrock of business law. The rule firmly states that a contract can't be valid without a consideration. The law absolutely requires this exchange. But, as with everything in law, right, there are very specific rules about how this exchange has to happen for it to actually be considered valid. You can't just make any random exchange.
And that brings us to the structure, the walls of our concept, if you will. To make this give and take completely legally bulletproof, the exchange has to pass a few tests. Specifically, our source material outlines 7 essential rules of a valid exchange, or the essentials of consideration. If your exchange doesn't check these boxes, the engine stalls out, and boom, your contract is invalid. Let's just walk through these rules one by one, keeping it super simple.
Okay, so here are our first 2 rules. Rule 1 states that consideration absolutely must move at the desire of the offerer. The person accepting the offer has to meet the offerer's specific expectations. Like, if I offer to sell you my car for cash, you can't just show up and decide to pay me in, I don't know, chickens, right? And Rule 2 is actually really fascinating. Consideration can move from the promisee or any other person. Basically, the person fulfilling the exchange doesn't always have to be the one directly accepting the offer. For instance, if the promisee is a minor or maybe someone who is mentally disabled, a third person, like a legal guardian, can step right in and provide that consideration on their behalf. Now, this next bit brilliantly illustrates how time plays a role, which brings us to our third rule. Consideration can actually be past, present, or future. If you do an immediate exchange, like buying a coffee, that's present consideration. But what about a prepaid mobile recharge? You pay right now for a service you're going to get later. That's future consideration. On the flip side, a postpaid mobile recharge where you use the data first and then pay for it after the fact, that acts as past consideration. See, the law is actually flexible enough to recognize that business doesn't always happen in exactly the same split second. Moving right along to Rule 4, we see something that honestly surprises a lot of people. Consideration does not need to be adequate. Yep, you've heard that right. The law genuinely does not care if you get a terrible deal. Let's say you're buying secondhand goods, like some depreciated electronics. The consideration amount you pay obviously won't match the original, real worth of the product. But here's the kicker. If the offerer accepts that lower, inadequate amount, the contract is still 100% valid. The court's job isn't to make sure you made a savvy financial decision, they just want to make sure an agreed-upon exchange actually took place.
All right, let's keep this momentum going with Rules 5 and 6. Rule 5 is pretty straightforward but totally critical. The consideration must be completely legal. No shocker there, right? You absolutely cannot use items that are prohibited in the nation as your exchange, and you definitely can't perform fraudulent acts to fulfill your side of the bargain. Then, Rule 6 tells us that there must be an independent consideration to support each independent agreement. Basically, there are 0 buy one, get one free deals on legal obligations. You can't just offer a single consideration to cover 2 entirely separate agreements. Every individual contract needs its own unique engine to run.
And that brings us to our final essential rule, Rule 7. Consideration must be real and competent. It has to be a realistic possibility. Our source material gives this incredibly funny but perfect example to explain this. If you promise to find a hidden treasure by physically going out and searching for it, that is a realistic, valid consideration. But if you promise to find that same exact treasure using a quote-unquote magic trick, well, that's considered impossible. Promising the impossible just isn't real, and therefore it is completely invalid as consideration. You literally cannot magically wish a contract into existence.
Okay, so we've established this ironclad rule. No consideration, no contract. If there's no proper exchange, the contract is dead in the water. But let's pivot for a second and ask a new question. Are there any exceptions to this strict rule? Remember our little mystery hook from the beginning of this explainer? Could you legally promise to give someone your car for absolutely nothing in return? Well, in general, no way. But the Indian Contract Act, 1872, actually has a massive loophole tucked right away in Section 25. Let's take a look.
Behold the Section 25 exception. It turns out the cold, strict world of contract law actually does have a heart. The law outlines a specific condition where a contract will be entirely valid, even if there is absolutely zero in-return consideration. And this exception? It's called natural love and affection. If an agreement is made out of natural love and affection, with the complete willingness of one party, it totally bypasses the no consideration, no contract rule. Isn't that wild?
Now, the crucial point here is that you can't just walk up and claim love and affection to get out of paying your local barista for your morning coffee. Nice try, but no. The law puts very strict guardrails around this exception so it doesn't get abused. For this to actually work, it must meet 3 very distinct criteria. First, the new agreement has to be a formally written document. Second, it has to be a legally registered document. And third, the parties involved must be the nearest people, meaning immediate family or blood relations. You have to check all 3 of these boxes for the exception to apply.
Let's see exactly how this looks in a real-world scenario from our source notes. Imagine a younger brother finds himself in a severe financial crisis. His elder brother steps forward to help him out, driven purely by natural love and affection. They write it all down and they legally register it. In this case, even though the younger brother is providing 0 financial consideration in return, nothing at all, the contract is perfectly valid. The law actively recognizes the inherent value of familial bonds and actually allows that to serve as the engine in this very specific, heavily restricted circumstance. Well, we have covered a ton of ground today. We learned that consideration, that essential mutual give and take, is the true engine of any valid contract, and it's governed by strict rules of reality, legality, and desire. But I want to leave you with this final, completely fascinating thought. While the business world absolutely relies on this strict transactional exchange to even function, isn't it incredible how the rigid letter of the law still carves out a designated space for genuine human connection and family? It just goes to show that while law governs business, it is still, ultimately, written by and for human beings. Keep that in mind the next time you're about to sign on the dotted line. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.